Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of Sales TV Live. Today, we're asking better questions for better connections, clarity, and control. I'm joined by Deb Calvert. Deb is the author of two bestsellers, Stop Selling and Start Leading, and Discover Questions, Get You Connected. She's also the founder of People First Leadership Academy. She brings a wealth of insights on the pivotal role of questioning in building organizational strength and driving sales success. Deb, welcome.
Thank you, Rob. I am delighted to be here. It's such a great show, and I'm honored to be a part of it. Thank you.
We're thrilled to have you here. Thank you. Deb, please tell us a little bit about you, your journey in sales, and where you are today.
Well, once upon a time, I was in newspaper advertising sales, and I started off in the phone room, and then I got an outside territory, and I was hungry to do a good job, to find all the resources that I could. So I went to the public library and looked for books on selling, and I found exactly one. It was Neil Rackham's Spin Selling. And I devoured that book, and I loved what I learned about questions. And pretty soon, though, I was selling, I was doing a great job. And pretty soon I realized, you know what, I think that there might be more than four kinds of questions. These four are helpful, but what are these? These don't quite fit. So that has then started since then a decades-long pursuit of researching questions and the purpose behind questions. And I've written a couple of books now about questions. That's my passion.
So let's jump right into it then. What makes a good question?
Oh, that's a great question. So the first thing that makes a good question is that it makes someone think. In fact, really good questions trigger something called instinctive elaboration, which simply means a really good question will hijack the other person's brain. Literally. When you have a good question and your mind is elaborating on the answer, pulling the pieces together, it's impossible to think about anything else until you put those pieces together and answer that question. So in sales, to fully have the attention of the person that you're talking to, your client or prospect, right? Instinctive elaboration is powerful. So great questions hijack the brain. They make someone think. They allow them to pause and reflect, because that's where value starts to develop. And appreciation for the question asker becomes bonding and creates those stronger connections. Ultimately, really good questions are singular, one focus at a time, and they're purposeful. They cut straight to exactly what you were trying to find out. They're not sloppy.
So how does a good question move me closer to you? So I ask you a question and it makes you pause and think, and I hijack your brain, and you're delivering that insight and that value to me and that knowledge to me. What do I then have to do to capitalize on that?
Well, you have to listen very well, because we're talking about relationships and building trust and maintaining trust. So think about anybody, Adam, in your life, anybody at all who you really, really trust. And if you examine, like, how did you get there? Chances are pretty good that they did ask you questions, even difficult ones. But then they listened. They fully received what you were offering. They didn't cut you off or interrupt or race ahead to what they were interpreting. They dignified you. And they received what you were saying so much that they asked the very powerful thing known as a follow-up question, right? A follow-up question proves I heard you, I processed what you said, and I care. I want to know even more. And all of that in incremental steps builds bonds of trust.
That makes perfect sense. I often laugh when I think about somebody once said that if you think back to your last first date, if you went on to a second date, it's because the person that you were spending time with, because they didn't talk about themselves. They asked you lots of questions. And let's be honest, we all like to talk about ourselves, don't we? And
it's true. There's a bit of research, actually, which says there are 40 questions. And if you ask someone 40 questions and genuinely listen and talk about those 40 things, both of you sharing information, you will fall in love. Now, the 40 questions are progressively more intimate, and it's sharing on both sides. The TV show called The Big Bang Theory here in the US has an episode about this where Penny and Sheldon are playing this game, these 40 questions. But I mean,
And did they fall in love?
they came to a much higher level of respect and admiration for one another.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So what's the importance of asking the right questions?
Extremely important. Questions have to be purposeful to be the right questions. They have to be clear, and they have to be timed well. Salespeople know this, right? You don't start out a meeting, "Hi, Rob, nice to meet you. What's your budget?" That's a perfectly fine question later when the trust has been established and when there's some context for asking that kind of a question. But at the beginning, especially when relationships are fragile and when buyers already have up the, sellers are to be avoided mentality, we've got to break down the barriers and make sure that we're focusing first on understanding before trying to be understood.
We've got a comment from the audience I wanted to share. Bob Britton says, I use Socratic questioning quite frequently, but it's not as easy as one might think. You really need to know your space to guide them with questions. But I find it more productive than the other types of questioning. I know what he means by that, but Deb, you're the expert. Can you talk us through what is meant by Socratic questioning and your thoughts around that?
I will. I do want to preface this with another setup piece, though. So, Bob, brilliant. Thank you for the question or the comment. I think a lot of people misunderstand the second part of what Bob said. So I want to address that first. It isn't easy to ask really high quality questions and to follow a line of critical thinking and reasoning that progresses the conversation. It's not as natural as simply asking questions. In fact, some questions can work against you if you aren't thoughtful about how you position them. So this is sort of like breathing. Yes, we can all do it automatically. Even 3-year-olds can ask questions. Why? And they don't necessarily help the conversation. But just like breathing, if you master certain techniques for yoga or distance running or labor and delivery of a child, right? There are techniques that will help you do a better job of accomplishing what you want to with your breathing or with your questioning. Okay, so Socratic questioning is a form of questioning that helps promote self-discovery. Rather than me asking just fact-based questions that you know all the answers to, I help you see things in a different way. I guide you by my questions to reveal information and to think for yourself and begin to put some pieces together. And Discover, which is the model of 8 purposes for asking questions, has a couple of those that are especially high value when it comes to promoting that self-discovery. So thinking about what do you want to accomplish, and what Bob's describing is a process, Socratic questioning to engage and involve and help someone come to their own conclusions. That process requires different purposes of questions.
How important is gaining permission before asking questions?
Extremely. Because remember, those buyers have their defenses up. Sellers are to be avoided. We have to be self-protective. So to state the intention and get permission is extremely valuable. I call it a statement of intent. It simply sounds something like, Rob, I'd like to understand your needs a little bit better before I prescribe something that might not fit well. May I ask you a few questions? It's something very simple, followed by that permission, usually a close-ended question that just gets a yes, no. Always gets a yes if you put the statement of intent out there. I'd like to help you.
And how do you balance between asking questions to gather information and giving space for the client to share their concerns freely?
Okay. There are 8 purposes of asking questions. You're describing the first one, the D stands for data. And those are fact-based questions, which we need. We need information. We need information so that we can make the best proposition, the best solution. But if you ask too many of those questions, especially too many in a row, it's uninteresting to your prospect or client. Ho-hum, I know the answers. You should already know the answers. That's on my website. This is boring. Pretty soon they run out of time because it's not interesting. So it's much better to ask those data questions, only the ones you need and couldn't find elsewhere, and to ask them along with, in between, other questions that are thought-provoking and mentally engaging for the person that you're talking to. Mix them up.
So how does one get that kind of rhythm going in a conversation? Because there's always the challenge that you become very focused on your questions. So I ask you a question, and then I ask you a question, and then I ask you a question, and then it becomes, although it doesn't become an interrogation, it can kind of have that feel a little bit, can't it? So how do you balance the kind of you giving me answers and me responding and adding something and educating?
I have to give you 3 tips. Long answer to that question, Adam. So the first one is so that we avoid this looking like a tennis match, back and forth, back and forth. Try to avoid asking too many close-ended questions, the ones that could be answered with a yes, no, because they start with helper verbs. Is, are, can, could, will, would, right? Any of those can be answered with a yes, no. They signal to the other party that you want a fast, short answer, and that's what you'll get. And that's why you have to ask lots of questions back and forth. The second piece of this is to really know what you're after in the conversation. Salespeople, be careful, because of course you're here to make a sale. Everybody knows that. That doesn't go away. But if that's all you're thinking about, how fast can I get to a possible close, or how quickly can I qualify or disqualify this prospect, that'll show. And it won't feel good to the buyer, and you're going to be left with less than you might have gained from the conversation. If you can mentally prepare yourself for any conversation with a buyer, mentally prepare yourself to learn something about the buyer, to understand and to bond with the buyer, it changes the whole conversation. You're still going to make a sale. You're still going to get what you need to qualify the buyer. You're going to get a lot more too. And don't worry, even if it does take 1 or 2 extra minutes, it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run because you're going to make more sales. You're going to form more relationships. So trust me on this. Go try it. And then the third piece, lengthy answer here. The third piece to what Adam said is, how do you get in the rhythm? Well, the purpose of asking questions will help you do that because you'll be able to identify, once you know the 8 purposes, you'll be able to say, wait, I need to yield some space here to understand if there are issues that the client might have, concerns or apprehensions they might have. So let me ask some of those issue questions and some of these solution questions so I can kind of gauge where they are.
I've heard you mention 8 purposes for asking questions. I didn't realize there was more than one.
And what did you think the one was?
I want to know stuff.
Yeah.
So can you expound upon that?
You bet. Well, let me say this. We don't always ask questions because we want to know stuff. Sometimes we ask questions to dignify people. Sometimes we ask questions to yield so that we're not doing all the talking and then we have discovery. So let's just take that completely out of the equation. The 8 purposes of questions, they're framed by the acronym DISCOVER. The first book I wrote was exclusively for sales. That was 10 years ago, and it was Discover Questions Get You Connected. The new one, I'll just flash this up here. This one goes beyond sales, and it's got research from all different domains, got over 100 benefits that are proven to come from asking questions. But, this was my research. After I read Spin Selling, I went out and I researched. I was working through Northwestern University, the Kellogg School, the Salesforce Advisory Board, and some other places, researching why do people ask questions. And so I would interview salespeople, and I and others would ride along with salespeople, and we'd interview clients afterwards. And I wanted, true confession here, Rob, I wanted there to be 9 purposes because I had it in my mind that the word discovery would be a great acronym. And I waited a long time to try to find one more purpose. And then one day I realized, ooh, discover is a word too. And if there are only 8 purposes, maybe I'll just settle on that. So I always invite people, if you come up with a 9th purpose, I'm still hanging on to that why. We'll change the word. Let me know. But yeah, I think it's surprising that there are only 8 reasons essentially to ask a question.
Let's go with the 9th is you.
Maybe, but that's all covered by issue, because if it's about me, you have an issue with me or my product or the way that we've been interacting, that's already covered by the I.
How do we get better at this? How do we train sales teams to use questioning techniques more effectively?
Well, you said it. You learn about it and you practice it. You move through the discomfort. You disabuse some of those antiquated myths and misperceptions, like some people think you're never supposed to ask a question unless you already know the answer. Not true, unless it's some courtroom drama on the big screen. You should be inquisitive and curious and open, humbly open to hear what other people might be thinking. So you appreciate and you learn about questions, and then you practice, and pretty soon the results, the benefits cause you to want more and more of it. So it gets easier because you see the value.
Is there a risk though? So I get that, we all need to rehearse things and we need to plan how this conversation is going to unfold ahead of the conversation. So I've worked out what questions I'm going to ask, and I've worked out what I think the follow-on questions to those are, and I've thought about framing the question. This is the purpose of this particular question, and this is what I'm hoping the outcome from this will be. Isn't it like I'm kind of being a little bit manipulative there? One of the things that's beautiful about a natural conversation is that it's very dynamic and it's very we don't know where it's going to go, and don't we risk losing that if we have a very strategic questioning regime that forces people down one avenue or another?
Absolutely, yes. And you model it here, right? You invited me to a conversation. You didn't send me questions ahead of time and tell me what to think about, as so many other shows do. This is organic. It's real. You left space for me, and you were brave enough to, just say this is going to go where it's going to go. That's real. That's just how people are. I like what you said in reverse, Adam. So instead of thinking about what do I want to ask and what's my follow-up question and what's the outcome I want, how about we just start here? From this conversation with this particular buyer, here's the outcome that I want. And if you think about that, it changes the conversation. The outcome I want is to build a relationship. The outcome I want is to build on the relationship so they are going to say yes to what I'm proposing to them. The outcome I want is to gather enough information. There's always an outcome. That will help you know your purpose, and it will help you stay true to that, as opposed to getting hyper-focused on close, quota, which any buyer can read in about 0.08 seconds flat. So we want to be careful not to give that wrong impression. Differentiating yourself from other buyers includes showing that there's more to it than, you purchased what I was manipulatively trying to box you into buying. So,
wait, are you saying there's no magic question that tricks them into buying what I want them to buy?
If there is, Rob, and I'll tell you an example of one that's about as magic as it gets. But if there is a magic question, it only works short term, and then you're having to deal with buyer's remorse and cancellations and bad reputations. So don't bother. But the most magic question I've ever heard is from life insurance salespeople, because they say to you with the grave expression on their face, they say something like, "But Rob, what would happen to your family if, unfortunately, you were to pass away and didn't have them covered?" Right? And I'm going to use Adam's word. That does, if not in the moment, ultimately that does feel manipulative.
Right.
Who cares? It's their problem, not mine anyway.
Yeah. Along those lines, what kinds of questions are not particularly effective or could be perceived negatively?
Well, that one, the blame or shame question, where the intention
Blame
is
or
to
shame.
make someone feel bad, to give you what you want. Another type of question that I really don't see a lot of value in is a question that is overly leading. And that's going to include, hold on, salespeople, you're not going to like this. It includes the questions that start with, what if I could? What if I could show you a way to save tens of thousands of dollars? Okay, because you know what buyers say? This is all research based. It's not Deb said. Buyers very often say, well, if you could, why don't you just do it? Right? There's a frustration because they feel like you're trying to put them in a corner, box them in to give you that leeway. So any question that feels inauthentic or it feels like it serves your purposes rather than the purposes of the other person, those often backfire. And if we're about building relationships and establishing trust, then don't let yourself go down that wrong path.
Mm.
We have a comment from Jess Flack. Jess says, how much background research should be covered before attempting to build relationships for a sale? I get lots of hard sells happening straight after a connection on LinkedIn, and it's always done with the same, I've seen your website, and it's so surface level that's not really taking the time to get to know who I work for. As a local authority, we have tenders, procurement frameworks, and a wealth of other parameters that inhibit that front doorbell sales call. Even an acknowledgement of that would be cool from my point of view.
Jess, I adore this comment and question, and I'm going to get up on my soapbox for just a moment. Quality versus quantity is a true consideration, and I understand there are different types of sales, different types of models. But anytime there is a primary focus on quantity, you'll see exactly what Jess is talking about. I am required to make 100 calls per day or 100 LinkedIn requests per day. Well, it can't help but be generic. If there's too high a volume, you will sacrifice quality. I would much rather, and in every sales organization that I've worked with, I have said the same thing, and we have seen better results when that number comes down, but the quality expectation is different. We focus on quality, which includes, let me find out a little bit. You know, in this day and age, if I wanted to know something about Jess other than she has a LinkedIn account and I can do a generic pitch, all I have to do is look at her company, look at her LinkedIn profile. There's something there. We're talking a couple of minutes for a much better, real connection. If nothing else, she's going to appreciate that, hey, Deb took the time. She's not like all the others who send me this generic spammy stuff.
So many questions I still have yet to ask, but we're running out of time.
Wow.
I know. I told you it would fly by. Deb, how can people find out more about you?
Well, look me up on LinkedIn, but don't send me the spamming generic stuff because I'll school you on that. But do connect with me. I always love the follow-ups. You can look at my Leadership Academy, which has a lot of free courses. That's peoplefirstpotential.com, all 3 words spelled out. My business site, People First PS, which stands for Productivity Solutions. Hey, get the book. Why not? And let me know what you think and what questions you have. I just really always enjoy whatever kind of connection we can get.
Fantastic. This has been great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
We now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get show highlights, beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes. You can scan the QR code on screen or visit us at SalesTV.live and click on newsletter. This has been another edition of Sales TV Live. On behalf of the panelists and everyone at Sales TV Live, to our guest Deb, to our active audience, thank you for being an active part of today's show and today's conversation. Until the next time, we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.